The sound of clinking glasses, cheerful laughter, and low jazz filled the rooftop terrace of the downtown building where I had spent the last 7 years of my life. The sunset cast a warm orange hue across the skyline as colleagues raised their champagne flutes and offered congratulations. "To Kelly," said Hannah, my closest friend at the firm, lifting her glass high. "From entry-level analyst to senior strategy director, you've more than earned it." A small chorus of cheers followed, and I smiled, my heart full. This promotion wasn't just a new title, it was a symbol. Proof that everything I had poured into this company, all the late nights, missed birthdays, and weekends buried in pitch decks, it had finally meant something. I glanced across the crowd and locked eyes with Vincent, my boss, the man who had hired me and whom I'd once admired. He raised his glass, gave a tight-lipped smile, and turned away almost instantly. Strange. But then again, Vincent had been acting strange for weeks. He had once been my mentor. We'd worked side by side on the biggest client deals. He used to praise my instincts and leadership, but lately, he'd been cold, distant, short in meetings, dismissive even. At first, I thought he was just under pressure from the board. Q3 had been rough, but something told me it was more than that. Still, I wasn't about to let his sour mood ruin this moment. This was my night, until it wasn't. Just as I placed my glass down and turned to accept another congratulation, I heard Vincent's voice rise above the music. "Everyone," he said, stepping into the center of the terrace and tapping a spoon against his glass. "If I could have your attention for one final announcement." A hush fell. He waited a beat too long, savoring the silence. I felt something in my stomach twist. He turned to me, a smirk barely hidden on his face. "Kelly, you've had your celebration," he began, his voice oozing smug satisfaction. "Now, it's time to say goodbye. Your position is being terminated, effective Friday." There was a beat of stunned silence, a few gasps. My mouth opened slightly, but I didn't speak. He wasn't done. "We're restructuring," he continued. "Your responsibilities are being redistributed across the leadership team. It's nothing personal, just business. I wanted to give you a proper send-off." He actually raised his glass again. The music was still playing faintly, but the energy had evaporated. I looked around at my colleagues, some frozen in shock, others avoiding eye contact. Hannah's face had gone pale. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have asked why. Instead, I smiled. "No problem," I said simply. Vincent blinked. He hadn't expected that. I could see it on his face. He wanted drama. He wanted a scene. Maybe he thought humiliating me in front of everyone would make him feel powerful. Maybe he believed I'd beg, grovel, cling to the title he had just snatched away. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. "Friday, then," I added. "I'll be out by end of day." And then I turned back to the table, picked up my glass, and took one last sip of champagne. The night ended awkwardly. People left early. Some whispered apologies. Others just disappeared. Vincent disappeared too. But I stayed. I stayed until the string lights dimmed and the waitstaff began clearing plates. Because what Vincent didn't know, what no one at the party knew, was that I had seen this coming. Weeks ago, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. In the hallway, late at night, when Vincent didn't realize I was working in the next room. He had been on a call, whispering about phasing her out, about how optics mattered and that we'll let her enjoy the party before we cut her loose. He thought he was being clever. What he didn't know was that I'd already taken steps. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. So when he said Friday, I already knew what was coming. And more importantly, I knew what I was going to do. Because this wasn't just about a job. This was about respect. About betrayal. About being cast aside when you're no longer convenient. And people like Vincent, they always underestimate the quiet ones. Friday was coming, but what he didn't know, what he never saw coming, was that by the time Friday arrived, it would already be too late. The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft hiss as I stepped into the quiet of my office floor the next morning. Thursday, just one more day before the clock ran out. My coworkers avoided my gaze as I walked past their cubicles. Some typed furiously, pretending not to notice me. Others threw me sympathetic glances, unsure whether to say something or stay silent. I didn't blame them. This place thrived on silence. Not loyalty, not honesty, just quiet compliance. That's how Vincent had kept his grip on power for so long. He didn't need to be liked. He needed to be feared. I sat down at my desk and turned on my monitor. My inbox was full. HR paperwork, calendar updates, transition forms, all coldly clinical. A digital goodbye. I opened each file, reviewed them with a calm precision, and filed them away. Then I opened my personal drive. Tucked away in a secure, encrypted folder was everything I'd been building for the past 2 months. A detailed audit of Vincent's financial activity within the company. Let me be clear. I hadn't gone digging for revenge. I had stumbled upon it by accident. 2 months ago, I had been working late, reviewing budget reallocations for our expansion project in Singapore. Vincent had made unusual adjustments, large sums being rerouted through shell vendors that didn't make sense. It was sloppy, and I had questions. When I asked him about it the next morning, he brushed it off with a wave of his hand. "Just streamlining expenses," he said. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry, because I knew that tone. The one where he told you not to ask questions because he didn't think you'd understand the answer. So I started saving files, building a timeline. Quietly, carefully. I cross-referenced invoices, matched payment histories, checked vendor addresses. One vendor listed their office as a frozen yogurt shop in Montana. Yeah. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Vincent had been funneling company money through ghost vendors, rerouting funds, inflating costs, padding expense reports. It was subtle enough that only someone deep in the project architecture would notice. Someone like me. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I consulted a lawyer first, a sharp corporate whistleblower attorney named Teresa, recommended by a friend from grad school. She told me exactly what to do. Document everything. Create a trail. And above all, don't tip your hand until you're ready. So I followed her advice. I built the file. Time-stamped everything. And then I made 3 copies. One on a secure cloud server, one printed and sealed in an envelope, and one in a USB drive that never left my handbag. By the time Vincent stood up at my party with his smug little grin and his time-to-go speech, I already had my finger on the trigger. And he didn't even know it. At lunchtime, I walked across the street to a coffee shop I used to love before the late nights stole all my free time. Hannah met me at a corner table, her face tight with worry. "I still can't believe he did that," she said, barely touching her sandwich. "Publicly. Like you were some temp who messed up a spreadsheet." "Vincent's never been subtle," I said, stirring my coffee. "He wanted it to hurt." "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. "You just smiled. That scared him, by the way. He looked totally thrown." I smiled faintly. I've learned that silence unsettles men like Vincent more than outrage ever could. She gave me a look. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "I'm just preparing for my exit," I said innocently. "Making sure my house is in order." She raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" I looked out the window. "Probably not, but you'll find out soon enough." After lunch, I returned to the office and printed out a clean, professional transition report. I included every project I'd worked on, status updates, key contacts, passwords, everything they'd need if they wanted to keep things running smoothly after I left. A gift-wrapped roadmap of my work. But it wasn't generosity. It was contrast. Because when the storm hit, I wanted it to be clear. I did everything right. I left no mess. I left no trace. And they still chose to humiliate me. That afternoon, I received an automated calendar invite from HR. Final exit interview, Friday, 3 p.m., neatly slotted in like I was being erased from a system. But what HR didn't know was that by 3 p.m., Friday, the system itself would be in question. Vincent had chosen Friday to clean house. I had chosen Friday to burn it down, and the fuse had already been lit. Friday morning arrived like any other. The city was waking up with its usual rhythm: traffic, coffee carts, elevator dings. But for me, the air felt different. Charged, like a storm brewing quietly under clear skies. I dressed with care: black blazer, simple gold earrings, a blouse in deep blue, my calm before the storm color. The elevator ride up to the 21st floor felt longer than usual, even though I'd taken it 1,000 times before. But this time was different. This time I wasn't coming to work. I was coming to finish what I'd started. When I walked into the office, I was met with a few nods, some half smiles, and a quiet tension hanging in the air. Rumors had started swirling the day after the party. People didn't know what had happened, only that something felt off. Even Vincent had been oddly quiet, barely visible in the halls, speaking only through his assistant. By 9 a.m., I was at my desk, sipping coffee, organizing the final pieces. The transition file was printed and bound. The USB drive with the financial data sat in my purse, and the sealed envelope, the one containing my full report of Vincent's misconduct, addressed to the board's ethics committee, was resting in the top drawer of my desk, ready to be delivered. At 9:15 a.m., the first sign came. Vincent stormed out of his office and slammed the door behind him, hard enough that the sound echoed across the floor. His face was red, jaw tight. He barked something at his assistant and disappeared into the stairwell. I didn't need to ask what happened. I already knew. 10 minutes earlier, the board had received an anonymous tip, the kind that came with names, dates, wire transfers, and supporting documents. The kind that couldn't be ignored, because that tip had come from me, from a secure email, with attachments that couldn't be traced back to my work account. And a final note: I trust the board will know what to do with this information before legal authorities need to be involved. Subtle enough to keep it internal, strong enough to make them sweat. By 10 a.m., the company's general counsel had arrived in the building. A woman named Barbara, whom I had met twice in all my years there. She didn't deal with day-to-day. She dealt with crises. Vincent hadn't planned on having one. Around 11 a.m., I was called into a casual check-in meeting with HR, earlier than my scheduled exit interview. Denise from HR smiled stiffly as I walked in, her fingers laced tightly together. "Kelly," she said, "thank you for coming in. We just wanted to check on how you're doing, with everything going on." "I'm doing fine," I said, folding my hands calmly. "It's been a productive week." She shifted in her seat. "We wanted to make sure you weren't leaving under the wrong impression. The decision to terminate your role was part of a larger restructure." "Of course," I said, my tone even. "Just business, right?" Her smile twitched. There was something different in her eyes now. Not pity, not warmth, caution. Like she didn't know what I knew, but she could feel the temperature rising. HR could always smell when something was coming. They just never knew where the fire was until it reached their feet. I didn't give them anything. I stayed polite, cooperative, professional, because that's what made it burn more. By noon, I returned to my desk. Vincent hadn't been seen in over an hour. His office lights were off. The assistant was gone. Slack messages started flying. Quietly, cautiously. Did Vincent get called into a board meeting? Why is legal here? Something's going down. They were right. At 12:45 p.m., I received a text from an unknown number. "We received your report. Please do not leave the building before speaking with our committee representative. Board Compliance Office." I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it. They had it. The report was in motion. At 2:30 p.m., I walked toward the conference room for my exit interview. The same one Vincent had smugly arranged for me earlier in the week. Only now, Vincent wasn't there to see it through. When I opened the door, Denise was already seated, but this time she wasn't smiling. Next to her sat a tall man in a gray suit. serious, silent, and watching me carefully. "Kelly," he said, standing. "I'm James Price, internal counsel for the board. I'd like to ask you a few questions before we proceed with your departure documentation." "Of course," I said smoothly, taking a seat. "I'm happy to answer whatever you need." He didn't smile, just opened a folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was one of my attachments, printed in color, stamped with a timestamp, and marked confidential. The fuse was lit, and the explosion was only beginning. The silence in the conference room was so thick I could hear the ticking of the wall clock behind me. James Price, the board's internal counsel, didn't waste time with small talk. "We've reviewed your report," he said, his voice even, controlled. "What you provided is extensive." I nodded. It needed to be. Denise from HR sat frozen beside him, her hands clenched in her lap. This was no longer an exit interview. This was a legal pre-briefing, and she knew it. James continued. "Several of the financial documents you included suggest serious breaches of fiduciary duty. Some could constitute fraud if verified." "They're already verified," I replied calmly. "Check the audit trail on our internal system. I made sure everything was time-stamped and recorded. The files I sent weren't my opinion, they're the company's own records." He regarded me for a long moment. I met his gaze without flinching. "What do you want from this, Kelly?" he asked finally. "I don't want anything," I said, folding my hands on the table. "I'm leaving today, as planned. I have no interest in dragging this through the media or destroying the company." "Then why send it?" "Because if I hadn't, no one would. And because people like Vincent shouldn't get to crush careers for sport and walk away untouched." A beat of silence passed. James nodded once and closed the folder. "We appreciate your discretion," he said. "The board will begin an emergency investigation immediately. We've already placed a freeze on Vincent's financial authorizations and begun a deeper audit. We'd like you to make yourself available for any follow-up questions over the next few weeks." I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder. "You know where to find me?" I walked out of the conference room with the same composed stride I had entered with. Only this time, I wasn't just the woman being shown the door. I was the one who had opened it and let the truth in. By 4 p.m., the whispers were no longer whispers. Someone from accounting leaked that Vincent had been escorted from the building. Not by security, yet, but quietly through the parking garage under the pretense of a personal emergency. But it wasn't personal. It was official. The executive floor was locked down for internal meetings. Legal was crawling through his office. Emails were being pulled. Devices were being collected. And the staff? They were buzzing. What happened? Did Vincent get caught? Is that why Kelly looked so calm all week? I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. People started connecting the dots themselves. The way Vincent had blindsided me at the party. The way I hadn't reacted. The way I'd kept showing up every day, cool and composed. By 4:30 p.m., Hannah slid into the seat beside me at the office cafe. Her eyes were wide. "Vincent's gone," she whispered. Like, gone. "They're wiping his email. Nobody's saying anything, but—" "I know," I said quietly. She blinked. "Wait, you knew?" I looked at her. "You asked me if I was planning something." Her mouth dropped open slightly. Kelly, what did you do?" I smiled faintly. I told the truth. At 5 p.m., I packed up my things. Not in a cardboard box, in my sleek, everyday work bag. No drama, no spectacle, just a quiet walk to the elevator. And when I stepped in, I felt something shift, like a weight finally lifting from my shoulders. But before the doors closed, a familiar voice called out, "Kelly, wait!" I turned. It was Barbara, the general counsel. She stepped into the elevator with me, holding a folder. "I wanted to catch you before you left," she said. "The board's meeting late tonight. We're initiating a formal misconduct investigation into Vincent. What you provided is likely to trigger SEC reporting requirements." I said nothing, letting the silence speak for itself. She handed me the folder. This is a formal notice of whistleblower status. It protects you from retaliation. I know you're technically leaving the company, but if you ever want to return in any capacity. Thank you, I said, tucking it into my bag. But I think I've already outgrown this place. She smiled. You're probably right. The elevator opened on the ground floor. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I looked back at the glass tower behind me. The place where I had given 7 years of my life, my energy, my ideas. The place that had tried to bury me with a smile and a party. But I hadn't been buried. I'd been planted. And now the roots of truth were beginning to crack the surface. By Monday morning, the storm had officially gone public. The news broke just after 9 a.m., buried halfway down a financial news digest, but impossible to miss. Internal investigation launched into executive misconduct at Stratwell and Company. It didn't name Vincent outright, but those of us who had worked there didn't need names. The phrasing was enough. Unauthorized financial activity, whistleblower report, board-initiated audit, senior executive placed on immediate administrative leave. The article was short, clinical, and packed with impact. Inside the office, the mood was different now. The same people who had stayed silent the day Vincent announced my dismissal were suddenly buzzing with energy. Slack channels lit up. Office gossip turned into frenzied speculation. And the name on everyone's lips? Mine. I wasn't there, of course. I had no reason to be. My contract had ended Friday. I was no longer an employee. But that didn't mean I was gone. By noon, I had received 3 messages on LinkedIn from coworkers. All former whispers turned full-throated voices. I wish I'd stood up for you sooner. What you did was brave. If you're planning anything next, I want in. I'm done staying quiet. You gave me the push I needed to leave, too. Thank you. One message, though, stood out from the rest. It came from a woman named Erica, someone I barely knew from another department. We'd only spoken in passing. Kelly, you don't know me, but I've worked under Vincent for 5 years. He took credit for my work more times than I can count. I thought I was imagining things. I thought I was crazy. But what you did, it gave me proof I wasn't. Thank you. I stared at her message for a long time. Then I replied simply, You're not crazy. You were just in the wrong system. Keep going. It hit me then. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all the people who had been overlooked, shut down, silenced. People who were just trying to do good work in a place that treated them like they were disposable. And now? That place was imploding. By Tuesday, the board released an internal memo acknowledging serious lapses in financial oversight. Vincent's name was finally mentioned. He had been officially terminated, pending further legal review. They used the word terminated, not resigned. That distinction said everything. The same day, Hannah called me in disbelief. They're overhauling everything, she said. New policies, new expense review systems, mandatory ethics training. They've even brought in an external firm to audit vendor contracts. Sounds like damage control, I said, pacing my apartment. It is, but it's real. For once, they're scared. People are actually speaking up. I didn't say it aloud, but I felt it. The system was cracking, and I had been the first hit of the hammer. And the best part? I wasn't even finished yet. Because while Stratwell and Company was scrambling to contain its mess, I was already in conversations with 3 different firms, each of them aware of the news, and each of them impressed by how I had handled myself. One of them, a rising consultancy firm called Altira Partners, had reached out personally. The CEO, a woman named Naomi, requested a one-on-one meeting. I read between the lines, she said during our Zoom call. You held your composure through a takedown and never made it about revenge. That's rare. I wasn't looking for revenge, I told her. I was looking for accountability. There's a difference. She smiled. Exactly what we need here. We've been quietly building a leadership program for women in strategy roles. I want you to help lead it. By Thursday, I had signed a new contract, with better pay, a higher title, and a leadership position that actually meant something. Altira gave me a private office, a voice at the table, and a platform to lead real change. But the best moment came that Friday, exactly 1 week after my so-called promotion party. That morning, Stratwell and Company released a formal statement to the press. It read, "We acknowledge the valuable contributions of Kelly Harmon during her tenure with Stratwell and Company. Her commitment to ethical standards and accountability has prompted significant organizational changes we are committed to upholding moving forward." It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly what they owed me, but it was public. It was permanent. And it was the first time in 7 years that the company had said my name out loud and attached it to something they respected. It was more than a vindication. It was a shift. That afternoon, I stood in my new office overlooking the city, sipping tea from a real mug, not the paper cups from the break room of my old life. And I smiled. Because some stories don't end with the villain's fall. Some stories begin when the survivor stands up, tells the truth, and builds something stronger than what was taken from her. 3 months after that night on the rooftop, the night Vincent toasted to my promotion and then publicly fired me, I walked onto a stage I never thought I'd see. It was the annual Women in Leadership Summit, held downtown, packed with industry professionals, executives, and young women hoping to rise without falling the way so many of us had. My name was printed on the agenda, just beneath the keynote speaker. Kelly Harmon, former director, whistleblower, and now partner at Altira. As I stood backstage waiting to be introduced, I thought about the surreal path that had led me here. One moment I was sipping champagne while a man stripped me of my job. The next, I was building a future that couldn't be taken from me, because this time it was mine from the ground up. I stepped into the spotlight as applause filled the hall, but it wasn't the kind of applause people give out of politeness. It felt charged, real. Like the room already knew the story, or had lived one like it themselves. I looked out at the faces, took a breath, and began. I was fired the same night I was celebrated, I said, in front of the same people who raised their glasses for me minutes earlier. A few gasps, nods. People leaned in. But what my boss didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had already prepared for that moment. Not out of bitterness, not out of paranoia, but because deep down I knew I was working in a place that valued power more than people. I told the story, carefully, without naming names. I spoke of the financial misconduct, the humiliation, the quiet planning. I described the difference between staying silent and standing up, and the cost of both. But more than anything, I spoke about value. Too often, I said, we're told to be grateful, to keep our heads down, to not make waves, especially women, especially when we reach for more. But what I've learned is that gratitude shouldn't be a leash, and silence shouldn't be the price of survival. When I finished, the standing ovation was immediate. It wasn't about me. It was about everything that moment represented. The woman who didn't just survive a takedown, she turned it into a platform. After the speech, dozens of attendees approached me, some to thank me, others to share their own stories. One woman in particular, a young project manager with tired eyes and a hesitant smile, pulled me aside. "I've been documenting everything," she whispered. "He takes credit for my work constantly. He tells me I'm too ambitious, but hearing you today, I'm going to speak up." I gripped her hand. "You're not alone. You never were. Just be smart, be careful, and know your worth." That evening, back at Altira, I debriefed with Naomi, my new CEO and partner in building something better. She listened with quiet pride as I told her how the summit had gone. "Your story's spreading," she said, "and not just in women's circles. I got a call from one of Stratwell's board members this morning. They asked for help developing a real ethics program." I raised an eyebrow. "The same board that let Vincent run wild for years?" "The very one," she said. "Seems they're trying to course correct. Late, but still. They want to meet." I smiled, Not with smugness, but with the clarity of someone who finally understands the depth of their impact. "I'll meet with them," I said, "but on one condition." Naomi tilted her head. "They acknowledge in writing the people they silenced. Not just me. Everyone who is buried under Vincent's ego. I want real reform, not lip service." Naomi grinned. "I had a feeling you'd say that." As I sat in my office, the skyline glowing outside the window, I took a moment to reflect. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into Stratwell 7 years ago, eager to prove herself to a man who saw her as disposable. I was no longer fighting for a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own. And in the end, Vincent had become exactly what he tried to make of me, a cautionary tale. Because he taught people how not to lead. And I showed them what happens when you refuse to stay quiet. The truth is, not all victories are loud. Some come wrapped in silence, in documentation, in resilience. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is recognition. Recognition that you were never the problem. The system was. Recognition that your voice mattered even when it shook. Recognition that standing up for yourself doesn't make you difficult. It makes you dangerous to the ones who rely on silence to survive. And that's a story worth telling. Forever.